Welcome to the stage, the Wallaby coach, Joe Schmidt. Off the long run. Joe, thanks so much for being part of today's event. I'm going to ask you a series of really easy questions, but the first one will be the easiest. Tell me about the first game of rugby you ever played.
I've got a brother 2 years older than me. He was 6, I was 4. I was watching. He got hurt, and I got to run on as a substitution because my dad had turned his back, and I just ran on. And back in those days, it was barefoot. And it was full tackle, whether you were 4, 6 or 40. And so I ran on and tried to get into a bit of full tackle and was as good at it as I am now, I think. Not very.
Well, you obviously played past the age of 4 and became an adult rugby player. Tell us about the peak of your career as an adult rugby player and how that compared to the peak of your ambition as an adult rugby player.
Look, I grew up in New Zealand, born in the metropolitan area of Kawakawa, which is tiny. And, I think like a lot of Kiwi kids, you have ambition to be an All Black, and that didn't get realised. But I played provincial rugby in New Zealand for a team called Manawatu.
Position? What position?
I played mostly on the wing because I was driven by fear, and it meant that I was quite quick, and a bit in the midfield where I tried to get back out to the wing, to be fair. And so I really enjoyed that. Played against a couple of touring teams. Probably the touring French team was a bit of a highlight. We lost in the last 30 seconds to the French. I marked a guy, Jean-Baptiste Lafont, who I met in later life when I was coaching in France, and he's big in Eden Park. They're a clothing company. He's good for a bit of kit.
He was the guy that scored the try from the end of the universe. Is that the bloke from the bottom of the universe?
He might have finished it, yeah. No, we had a good day there, and met Patrice Lagesquet for the first time, and I've gotten to know Patrice over the years. I know him well now, and was trying to help him when he was chipping away with Portugal, and I thought he did a fantastic job with Portugal. They were probably one of the most popular teams at the World Cup recently in France, just because they played with real ambition like Patrice used to, the Biarritz Express as he was. I'd like to say he was a little bit like me, driven by fear because he was fast and managed to get away from a lot of folk as well.
Tell me about the role of rugby in small town New Zealand, in Manawatu or in Mullingar and places you played. The rugby club and the relationship with the community of that town or village where you lived. Tell me about your experiences as rugby in that sense.
Yeah, it becomes a bit of a hub of the community. I was talking to Darby Lancaster this morning, had a catch up with him, and he was just saying that Kempsey Juniors, they've had more kids turn up than they've ever had turn up because Darby is now recognisable. And I think whenever that happens, it helps fuel the club just a little bit more as well. And because it becomes a community hub, so many things happen around that community facility that the rugby club rooms was. I know in Mullingar, in Ireland, the club was incredibly well set up. And they used to have functions there, and it was actually quite a profitable club. And from that perspective, it really became a hub for the local community. And it was a bit the same growing up, from Kawakawa to Te Aroha to Woodville, all places I know you've heard of. That I lived in those places and barely remembered them myself, actually. But the community did revolve around the sporting clubs, and rugby was central to that. It was either the rugby club or the golf club, and the golf club, you could extend your lifespan a little bit as a player, but the rugby club was a lot more exciting and enjoyable.
Tell me about, as a player, there are certain players in a squad or a team who are chipping in, they've got ideas, and they're telling the coach, hey mate, why don't we try this? And they're telling their other players whether they're the best player on the team or not. Were you one of those players, even though you're on the wing and affecting almost nothing, that was able to feed information up to your coach and to your peers and sub-peers in the back line?
I think saying almost nothing is being generous, actually. Virtually would probably be my adverb. Virtually nothing, but there was. I wasn't so much that. I played with some pretty good guys. Martini Love, I played with for quite a few years. His son Ruben Love has just been named in the All Blacks. Marty played New Zealand Māori and was a very good player. Mark Finlay was a fullback in our club side. He played a couple of tests for the All Blacks, and so I was more. I came out of school as a young kid going into a club that had 4 All Blacks in it. So you just shut up and do what you're told, pretty much. And a couple of those forwards like Gary Knight, you're actually more terrified of your own teammates than you are of the opposition. And if Knighty growled at you, you ran back out to the wing, which was handy because that was my position. But it was a pretty quiet time for me, to be fair.
Okay. Everyone knows that the Irish have sent pubs all over the world. The Italians have put pizza all over the world. My Lebanese brothers put kebabs all over the world. And New Zealand has sent rugby coaches all over the world. And the last several World Cups, almost half the teams sometimes have had coaches from New Zealand. Is it reputation? Is it reputation based on reality? Why is there some sort of intellectual leadership of the game coming out of your home country?
I think it's the respect we have for other cultures. We live in those Irish pubs and have a kebab on the way home, so we're connecting with that wider community. And I think it's, as I said, as a 4-year-old, my ambition was to sneak on if Dad wasn't watching and play the game. So when it's in your blood, it's just in your blood, and you've grown up with it. You've spent so much time in the game, and then I'm just a school teacher and probably just still a teacher of sorts. And so with being a teacher, you tend to coach from the very first year that you're teaching. And I went into a school called Palmerston North Boys High, and the very first day I was told that I had to contribute to the co-curricular program. At the time I was playing for Manawatu on the wing, and I said, look, that's brilliant. I'd spent the pre-season playing for the Jets, which was a National League basketball team, and I said, I'll coach basketball. Because I don't know if you've been to the Manawatu, but it's usually raining and it's horizontal rain, and so basketball has an appeal of being inside, and I was already kind of playing rugby, so better to just get wet once a day. So I said that, and Dave Sims was the principal, and he said, that's perfect. Basketball's on Friday nights. It won't affect your rugby coaching on Saturday mornings. So I end up doing both. And so you're kind of learning your craft from a very early age. And I think you mentioned Kiwis around the world being involved in coaching. I think there's a lot of teachers around the world who are involved in coaching.
I think Graham Henry was a school teacher.
Yeah, Ted, he's a school teacher. Gats, school teacher. Renz, there's a whole heap of us.
Can you guys see the subtitles to who those people are?
Sorry. Yep.
Warren Gatlin, Dave Rennie, and Graham Henry.
Yeah. And there are a lot more.
Sure.
Stuart Lancaster, who coached England, obviously. Yeah.
Every time a person takes on a new job, whatever it is, they get into this new job, and a lot of it is sort of what you thought it would be, but there's always a big chunk of things that you weren't anticipating, weren't expecting. I want to talk about your first big expat posting, coaching the Irish national team, and what were the aspects of that role that you couldn't have been prepared for, and whether they surprised you on the upside or the downside, or were just different to what you thought. How you managed that, the foreignness and the novelty of those challenges.
Yeah, I played a club season and a half in Ireland way back, and then I coached Leinster for 3 years, and we had a really good 3 years. So a lot of the players, in fact, who were playing for Ireland came from Leinster. So there weren't too many surprises. I knew in the Six Nations, we played all those players in European competitions, so I knew the opposition as well. So that was reasonably familiar to me, and it just made it a little bit more comfortable when my wife decided I was going to do the job. Some
of them are listening.
Yeah, I felt more prepared to actually give it a go.
A short time after you started coaching Ireland, the three big O'Gara, O'Driscoll, and O'Connell, who were probably the three best players, all stopped just as you got there almost. Can you tell me whether that was a big shock or whether that was something you had to manage? Was everybody okay with it in their squad? Did you have to settle the horses, as it were?
Not really. Johnny Sexton, was the up-and-comer to take over from Ron O'Gara. Dricko, he's kind of bullied me into doing it a little bit. He said he'd play one more year if I did it, and so we agreed on that. And it's funny, the last game we played in the Six Nations was against France, and his calf was shot, and the physio said he'd only last 60 minutes, and we scrambled through, thrashed them by 2 points, and at the end of it I said to Dricko, wow, fair play, you got through the full 80 minutes. And he said, no, I only played 50. Did you not see me standing out on the wing for the last 30? And I suddenly realised he was playing like me for those last 30 minutes. So we managed to hang in there, and Paul O'Connell was captain for 2 years for me with Ireland. He's a fantastic player and a hell of a leader, I've got to say. But then he retired, and we had lost 3 generational champions, which then were replaced by a generational team, I think, and that team have continued. When Paul O'Connell was finishing, young guys like Ian Henderson and James Ryan, some of those second rows were coming through. When Brian O'Driscoll finished, Robbie Henshaw, Bundy, whatever you want to call him, because he's from Galway.
The south of Galway.
Bundy Oaki, and Gary Ringrose, they were all just starting to emerge. So in Dricko's last year, one of the challenges I gave to him is I said, hey, there's a young kid, Robbie Henshaw, coming into camp. I want you to coach him as much as you can during the Six Nations. And I think people underestimate just how much value experienced players can add to the growth of inexperienced players. And I think that's one of the things that in club rugby now sometimes disappears a little bit. As I said, Mark Finlay played for the All Blacks, Marty Love, Māori All Blacks. They were guys when I was 19, 20, first playing club footy that I played alongside in the back three and learnt a hell of a lot of the game from those guys.
What I'm possibly trying to get to is the extent to which that experience with Ireland, losing a lot of talent, you've explained the reconstruction wasn't as hard as it might have been, but how that informs what you're going to be doing with the Wallabies and how that experience makes you a better setup to run the Wallabies here.
I wouldn't mind if we get Paul O'Connell, Rog and Dricko to come back, but they're a little bit old. And I think it maybe just helps you prepare to try to build from wherever you are. I think one of the things that we wanted to do in July is find out where we are and get a few fundamentals laid in and broaden the squad this time, find out a little bit more about a broader group so that we can start to build from there. Every test is exactly that. It's a test to make sure that you can try to get over the line in first place, but also try to grow just a little bit more as a group. And so, we'll try to do that next Saturday. We're pretty excited about the challenge that's going to be. It's a whole different challenge from Wales and Georgia when you come up against the Springbok.
I'm going to ask you about taking on this job, and when you sat down with Phil and figured out how it was all going to work, apart from the obvious stuff that we all go through, which is terms and conditions and pay and that sort of stuff, what were the sort of things that you wanted to make sure you had control of that were important to you that wouldn't normally appear on a standard workplace contract?
Yeah, nothing really. I came in, Peter Horn and Phil, they just both said to me, look, we'll support you as best we can. I grew up in a time when rugby was amateur and people talked about things and didn't necessarily write them all down. So, I've got a contract. I haven't actually read it, but I got my lawyer and accountant to have a look at it, and they suggested, I think, 16 alterations to it, but we didn't actually do any of them because we said that we'd support each other and try to get the job done as best we could, and I love that about rugby. I think there's some of the really good stuff about amateur rugby that still exists in the professional game. Some of it you can't afford to be amateur about because there are livelihoods and there are financial realities and there are competitive elements that you've got to build, but there's still some bloody good people involved in rugby at every level, and those people don't operate on contracts. They operate on goodwill and a real collective spirit, and so hopefully we can spread that collective spirit through the game and absorb the collective spirit that comes from the game, because I think it's one of the reasons that I'm here or Phil's over there and people are investing their time in clubs because they love the game and the game can love you back, and I've benefited from that in rugby, and I think a hell of a lot of people have. And it doesn't mean they have to make a living out of the game. It just means that they have to get some enjoyment out of it.
Tell me how much influence you might have if there's a player playing at a provincial team who's on the wing, but you think he should be at fullback, or there's I don't want to get into central contracting. That's all a bit complex. But can you ring up a Super Rugby coach and say, mate, this kid's going to go further, I think, if you put him at inside, not outside? Or how does that work? And is that formalised or informal?
It's certainly not formalised. And I'm not sure I've done it very often. I remember in Ireland, Robbie Henshaw was playing 13. But I was pretty keen for him to get a run at 12. Pat Lamb's another school teacher. Pat and I played together when we were young, played against each other in provincial teams. And I actually went down and took some sessions at Connacht where Pat was coaching, and I just rang him and said, hey, Pat, have you ever thought about playing Robbie at 12? And he said, do you want me to give him a run there? I said, look, only if it fits in. And he played at 12, which just gave us a look at him either as a 12 or a 13, and I haven't done it here. I didn't really do it with the All Blacks, but you get to know people, I coached with Les Kiss for a couple of years with Ireland. I'd have no hesitation whatsoever. We had Filippo Dongunu. He had to do a coaching intervention, and I got Les to do it for me because Filippo's up there.
What's a coaching intervention?
A coaching intervention, Filippo got a red card for a charge down. He actually hit the ball with his fingers, but because he made contact with the player who tried to chase it through, he got a red card. he got a 3-week punishment, but it was down to 2 weeks. They would reduce it to 2 weeks if there was a coaching intervention. So you do a coaching intervention, you video it, you discuss it with the player, you show the player the footage of the incident, and you try to modify what happened so that they don't repeat the same mistake. So I did the video conference with Filippo, and then out on the field, because Filippo's in Brisbane, Les did the intervention for me, the actual coaching, and it got ticked off by World Rugby. And that's the sort of, I suppose, cooperative spirit that is starting to build. Steve Larkham, I spoke to Steve last night. He's coming in to spend, from Sunday to Tuesday with us in Wallaby camp. So, we're connecting up. And if you're well enough connected, you can ask questions informally and maybe they'll happen and maybe they won't.
Okay, let's talk about some of the cultural issues in the game. I've read several times, and I presume it's true, that after a match, the All Black players are obliged or feel obliged or want to clean the rooms and sweep up and all that sort of stuff. Whether it's true or not, I don't particularly care. My question is, are there things like that? Are there off-field, non-measurable things that are part of the way you're approaching the Wallabies, little things that reflect the culture and the values you want to have the team reinforce?
I'd love to, but you don't go into an environment and say, this is how teams I've been involved with before do it. You should do it like this. I think you've got to... I talked before about trying to get to know the group. And so Johan Cruyff was an outstanding coach. I've seen a lot of things that he did and spoke about, and he summed up coaching as being coaching is about observing. And so I've just been trying to watch and see how they carry themselves, what they do, what are their default behaviours in any given situation. So before you try to modify a situation, you need to actually know what the situation is. And it is true. The All Blacks do an unbelievable job of cleaning their changing room. And one of the things I love about it is it might be Bowden Barrett, Centurion, on the broom. It might be Sam Whitelock, the most capped All Black ever, who's got the old dustpan and he's sweeping it up or putting it into the bin. And I think it helps keep everyone on the same level. And I do think that it's a positive set of behaviours away from the on-field behaviours that can contribute to a humility in the group. And a lot of times people talk about, in the All Blacks, about being grateful, about acknowledging that they are in an incredibly hard-earned but recognisably special position. And I'd love for the Wallabies to be similar, and I'm learning a little bit about who they are. And sometimes I think it's difficult because you've got new guys coming in and they're not quite sure who they are or why they play the game, or even how they play the game. So, we're still feeling our way a little bit.
Can I ask you, if there's some quite famous coaches out of this club, but it could be any coach, if Dave Brockhoff, who coached this club in the 60s and 70s and coached the Wallabies, or Brian Burnett, who coached in the 90s, guys who coached in the 50s, if they came down to Wallaby training, one of your sessions, what would be instantly familiar to them? What are the things that are happening which we've been doing forever and which are sort of fundamental to how the game's coached?
I think it's a really good question because I'm not sure of the answer. I know that when I played, even in the 90s, coaching was a lot more directive. I think it was, we were told exactly what we were meant to do all the time. Where I think that it's a little bit more organic with players generating some of the direction that the team takes. So maybe that wouldn't be as identifiable, but I'd hope what would be identifiable is I'm a believer that positive energy is contagious, just like negative energy is, and hopefully they'd see some positive energy from our coaching staff. You know, you got Mike Cron at 69 years old. He is not 69 years old. He is 69 years young. He has an energy that is irrepressible. And I've never seen a man get so excited about pushing, you know. My theory around Scrum is push harder. And he's got a whole lot of stuff that he does and gets incredibly excited about.
I now believe you are a winger. It's now been confirmed. Let me ask the question a different way. If one of those coaches in the 60s or 70s or 80s turned up, what would be the least familiar thing? I presume there's a technology answer to this question, but I don't know. What is their gadgetry or electronics or sat-nav or whatever it is that is especially cutting edge?
Coloured boots. Brightly coloured boots. They'd need their sunglasses. Drones and GPS. That'd be the standout gadgetry. So you got drones for that overhead. No one can hide. No one can hide from the GPS. We know how fast you went, how many times you went fast. Did you go fast at all? And did you move? And I think we'd fall close to that last category, really, between the two of us. But hence we're not playing for the Wallabies. But it is an impossible place to hide these days because everything's measured. And, I think sometimes too much is measured. If it doesn't count, don't count it. Because I think people bury themselves with a plethora of statistics and numbers. I think stick to what counts and measure that.
You mentioned my playing career indirectly. And there's a lot of young guys in this club who show me a lot of respect, and I've often wondered why it was, and I realised they never saw me play. Because I was a bloke who let my mouth do the talking. But I had a coach, Jackie Dowse, I don't think he's here now, he'd ring me up, and he wouldn't say I was dropped. He would say, no, you're not being dropped. There are just better players available. And I couldn't see the distinction between those two things, but he assured me there was one. I want to ask you what you've learned over the years about conveying bad news to players, and if you have a guideline or a way that you prefer to do that, because part of your job has to be letting people know that they're not going to be where they want it to be.
Yeah, so there were 22 phone calls yesterday. You can't go around and meet everyone, but I met 2 of the players this morning. I'll meet anyone who's Brisbane-based over the coming week. I sat down, I had 18 clips with one of the players, just giving them some feedback around the game.
Sorry, 18 film clips?
Yeah, it's just, again, gadgetry, but also just trying to help explain some really positive stuff. Because I think you get picked in a team because of what you can do, not what you can't do. And I think so often coaches or even in whatever business you're in, you focus on what someone's not providing instead of really trying to grow what they do provide. And so a lot of it is trying to build on the really positive things they bring to the game, and then trying to just, because if a guy is a big strong athlete, but he's got 2 speeds of standing still and slow, then he has a certain position, but you're not necessarily going to make him faster, but you need to make him as good as he can be in that domain, but then he adds other value in other places that your quick, small guy can't. So it's getting that balance.
So you're trying to explain to him where those skills are, where he fits in, and what he has to do next.
Yeah, this is what we loved about your involvement with us. You bring a really positive energy, but you're very quiet. We understand why. You're only young, and you're in with some of the guys you grew up watching, and understand that. At the same time, look at this image and that image. When you get the opportunity, you provide real value. Where we think that you can keep growing yourself is in this image and this image. you're a little bit hesitant about connecting and getting into a really positive tackle position. That's something that we think we can help you with, but we think you can build while you're outside the squad.
I'm prepared to say you put more into that than I used to get when I was getting dropped from teams.
Yeah, that was because the other players who were available that were better, they needed his input, you know.
I didn't doubt his assessment. Listen, to the extent there's an easy answer to this question, I know it's somewhere between. But have you turned up to the Australian scene with a game, a type of rugby in mind, and look for the players to play that game, or have you looked at the players available and then devise a strategy which best suits the talent pool? I expect it's not 100% one or the other, but you tell me.
Yeah, it's certainly 80% the latter. I have some ideas about how Australia have played in the past successfully, and so therefore you probably come in with a little bit of a preconception, but I've always felt that you've got to match the way you play with who you have, and you also want to extend their ambition in the game as well. So yeah, it is a blend, but I'd be much more toward the latter. That is, have a look at who you've got and then work out how you can best play.
Now, a lot of attention was paid in the last couple of weeks as to who would be available or needed for the games against Wales and Georgia, and whether overseas players would be needed or suitable or a good idea. I presume that policy isn't arrived at by one person, whether it's you or Phil or Peter, on your own. How does Australian rugby arrive at a position? What's the process where you figure out what your attitude is to people who might be leaving the game shortly or aren't currently committed to the local game? I'm almost as interested in the way the policy was developed as I am in the actual policy.
Yeah, I haven't seen the policy. It's one of those things that is a little bit like my contract that I haven't read. It's a discussion that Phil, myself, probably Herbie and Peter Horn had initially, and then it's a discussion with the coaches. Who do we need? Do we need to bring some experience in? It doesn't mean that I haven't spoken to overseas players over the period of time, but one of the things that I'm a massive believer in is that having access to players is massively important. If you want to grow a player and they play in a foreign country, it's very hard to have any sort of input into how they're building their game. So I think there's a real advantage in having home-based players. The other thing around having home-based players is, for example, with the Tars, you want people coming along and supporting the Waratahs. You want them building their way into competitions and being really competitive. And I think over the next couple of years that's going to happen. And as that happens, those guys get a level of confidence, a level of cohesion, where some of those combinations become pivotal parts of the way the Wallabies are selected and the way the Wallabies play. And if that happens in each of the Super Rugby teams, I just think that people can connect to the game for the whole year. They can connect right through Super Rugby. I mentioned earlier about Derby and Kempsey Juniors having such good numbers. One of the reasons, or the biggest reason, is that they want to be the next Derby Lancaster. Well, that's brilliant. But if you want to be the next, whatever the player is playing overseas, it's not the same connection. You can't run down after the game and get that guy's signature. Not unless your dad's got shitloads of money and flies you over to France and the big fella signs, you know. So it's that connection piece, it's the continuity, and it's the ability to build a team that are home-based and in that accessibility for the home-based fan.
I started off asking you some time ago about when you were playing as a young lad, whether you had the chance to communicate ideas, and you explained how there were better people at that job elsewhere in the back line. But in the Wallaby team you've got now, if you're happy to single out a couple of players, are there guys who you really value that they're feeding information back up the pyramid and bringing ideas and making their own running about ways to go forward?
Yeah, I think there always are. We have a leadership group, and they're very much the player voice. We're having discussions with players. It's not that big a group, and so you have individual conversations all the time, but they effectively will be the player voice, and so they're a mix of positions. And we had a leadership group meeting yesterday, just around the setup for the week, how we approach the week. This is our plan. What do you think? Do you want to shift this or shift that? And so they're very much part of the genesis of anything that we're trying to build, even if it's just week to week, even if it's, day to day. Sometimes I'll touch base with them and just get a little bit of guidance around, the length of training or what our focus is, or our mindset for this particular game or training or review meeting or whatever, and what they might want to pass on to the players as well.
Okay, we're running out of time shortly. I'm going to ask you if there was a particular law in the game that you could change, or a current mode of interpretation that you think rugby might change to make it a better sport. And you may want to touch on, I love South Africans as much as the next bloke, which is not very much. But I'm just joking, of course. I'm from Bondi, but I'm being silly. They're winning a lot of tournaments, and good luck to them. But maybe attitudes about how the bench is used, or what the original intention of the big benches was compared to how it's being deployed.
Yeah, look, I don't have anything specific, because a lot of people look at what's not being good enough in the game, and all the rest of it. There are some law trials that are coming in for this rugby championship. You got 30 seconds to set the scrum. You got 30 seconds to set your line out. 60 seconds to kick a conversion now, not 90 seconds. So there's a little less dead time, and so there are teams that will circumvent that by one particular player going down 14 times with various ailments across their body, and that sort of thing does get frustrating, because they can slow the game down through that. And with player safety being such a pivotal part of the game, no referee is very keen to hurry someone along if they go down injured. So I do think that the game is pretty quick now, and I do think there are less dead times in the game. So I actually thought that Super Rugby this year, I thought there were some super games, and I thought there were some fantastic tries scored in the Wales and Georgia games. Unfortunately, some of them by Georgia, but we won't go too deep into that. But we were happy to help build their confidence.
This might be a final question, and it's a bit of a change of direction, but there's an enormous number of sports documentaries all of a sudden all over streaming services, and over the last 50 years, some great movies about sport and TV shows about sport. Have you seen a show, a TV show, a movie, even a book, which you think is the best reflection of getting inside the professional sports scene? For those of us who aren't in the professional sports scene, who's got that right, do you think, of anybody?
Yeah, look, there's this old black and white movie, showing my age, called Rudy. And, oh, good on you. Yeah, good. You punched the air, because you were probably Rudy in your team. And he was the guy who was never good enough. And other players were available. But his dad worked in the steelworks. His brother worked in the steelworks, and he wanted to break that mould. And he actually went to university, and he he managed to get a scholarship in university because his family had no money, and he worked his way through university on the scholarship, and he never ever got named in the team. And he was in Gridiron. They have so many players, but they have the players who prepare the big players to play the game. And this kid worked his backside off for years and years and years. And it's based on a true story. But he finally, there's the last game of the season, right? And they're going to qualify. That there's nothing on the game. And the captain comes into the coach and he said, hey, look, I think you should give Rudy a jersey. I think you should name him in the squad. And the coach gives, thanks for that. I'll be the judge of that. And Rudy won't be playing. And the captain says, oh, well, if it's a spare jersey you need, he can have mine. And he puts his jersey down on the table and he walks out. And the coach says, yeah, you walk out. We'll cover you. And he walks out and there's a line of guys with their jersey and the next guy walks in. And it hasn't happened to me yet. It's probably just a matter of time. So you keep punching the air because you might get a jersey yet. I won't spoil the ending for you. RUDI.
Joe, there's 580 people here have listened to everything you've said with great respect and attention because you're a tremendous communicator and we love what you're doing. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been an absolute privilege to talk to you.